Kieran, recently you had an RCM Stability Review workshop in the Waikato. Tell us how it went.
It was quite interesting at the start, having good involvement, having people from like Chuck and Rob and people from GAM all speak and sort of set the scene on why we're doing this work. It was sort of good to see the changes in the team, sort of maybe potentially resistance to or not understanding how this is going to work, to going through and completing the development stage of one of the assets all the way through to the draft. So I think seeing confidence in the team, how they can actually apply these sort of RCM strategies and still stay true to the terms of RCM, make sure we can still fit these different strategies into different operating contexts we have across the business, and then showing how we can show that all the way through the process is quite good. Glad to see people come on board with that.
You mentioned in there stay true to the terms of RCM. I've observed variation in terms of our understanding throughout New Zealand, so keen to understand your definition of RCM.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of connotations out there about what RCM are. People have different ideas on what they think it is. But for me, it's really just following a structured process and to determine the best mitigating strategy for your asset. So the way to do that is to ask 7 questions. What is the function, the functional failure, the failure mode, the effect of that failure, the consequence, then what are you going to do to mitigate that effect? And then what would you do if you cannot mitigate the effect? As long as we stay true to those 7 questions, then we're essentially completing an RCM.
So Kieran, what's the plan for both the development of the strategies and then the deployment into site?
Yeah, so the focus this week was mainly around really understanding that first phase of this project. So we've got 3 distinct phases, developing, what will these tasks be? We've got the second phase is master data. What information do we have to capture to assign the right task? And then the third phase is deployment. So what is our maintenance plans and all these going to look like for the end user? So this week was definitely just focusing around the development of tasks. So we aren't worried at this stage on what the deployment piece will look like in terms of SAP, just focusing on what is the right task for the right time.
And what are the project timelines?
Hopefully the 3 stages will sort of work concurrently when we can. So obviously we can't deploy until we have our master data back, so it's a very important step within the process. We've already completed 1 asset to draft, so we're hoping to get that information off the site so they can start collecting that data as soon as possible. In terms of the plan, we're hoping to have all tasks completed, draft and reviewed by the end of the year, which means we can start deploying early in the new year.
So how do you see these national strategies integrating both with the RCM work that's happening currently on sites, but also the variability that we have within our plants?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be very tricky to create a strategy that's created nationally and essentially generic. So how do we make that actually applicable to every site in different operating contexts? So as we've gone through this process with the team, we've tried to establish really key questions. So a great example was, is a motor in a hazardous area is going to drive a different strategy to if it's not in a hazardous area. So how can we list all these really important questions that we need to know to make sure we assign the right tasks to the asset based on the operational context, while still having essentially a national strategy in place?
You mentioned operating context, and that's an interesting one, because if we step out of maintenance for a moment and into how we operate our assets, we have variation throughout New Zealand. So what are we going to do in terms of a check and adjust piece as we deploy to take the operational context into consideration?
When we're talking about operational context, like we're probably going to miss something, or there'll be something that's not quite right, and we just got to accept that we're not going to get it perfect in this first time. But what we're trying to do here is set up a way that we can have that plan, do, check and adjust cycle come through, and we're not rolling out an improvement to one site, we're rolling out to a national strategy, so effectively every site gets that improvement. They may not have seen the failure, but we can take the learnings from one site and accelerate that and push it through. I guess the one thing that would be good for people on site is to realise is that we're not trying to force this upon people. We're trying to set up a way that we can leverage everyone's site's learnings, and how can we then have a mechanism that we can push that into every site, so we're not just having one site value from a chain or a really good find or a great strategy that we've implemented, but we're actually having every site leverage off that learning and that whole cooperative spirit. When you deploy RCM in there's sites doing this and they have great results. It takes a year or potentially 2 years to see these results, or see where you've not quite got it right, and then doing that check and adjust cycle. Whereas if we can apply this to many sites, we can essentially at the end of 1 year review that against every single site, and we've got nearly 30 or 100 years worth of data because we've used the same strategy across the board. So the speed in which we can actually improve our strategies, which then improves our plant and improves our bottom line, is accelerated. So that's the real exciting thing that I see, is that we can really do that national view of how well are we actually doing and how well does everything work.
So Kieran, if we just chunk up higher, how does this piece of work add value to both our farmer shareholder right through to our customer?
I think it falls into that right task, right time, I guess. We're making sure everything we're doing is the right task, right time. But also, one thing we discussed this week is, what if this product becomes really important? Well, our ability to adapt to, say, new market changes, we can change our strategy very quickly across the board because we've potentially aligned a certain question or a certain master data requirement we need. Could be what type of product it is, and that's going to drive a different outcome. So for the current market conditions, our strategy could be different to what it could be potentially in 5 years, and we might have to adapt quite quickly. So through this mechanism, we can identify where these tasks are, what assets they are, and quickly adjust that nationally.